I'm Brian Van from sportbiketrackgear.com, and today we are going to service the cooling system on our 2014 STG Road Racing World Honda CBR1000RR project bike. For the cooling system service, this is going to be a multi-step process, right? We need to replace the engine coolant, the green coolant that's in there, with water wetter. We're going to use the pre-mixed stuff that's made with deionized water. Two reasons we want to do this. We want to make the cooling system on this bike as efficient as possible. Remember, a cool running engine is a strong running engine. You get more power the cooler the engine is running, right? Water wetter has the ability to reduce operating temperatures by almost 10 degrees as compared to standard coolant, the 50-50 mix with water. Okay, that's reason one to do it. Reason two, and probably the most important one, is green coolant and racetracks don't mix. If you have a crash and you have a coolant spill, or you just have a leak and you have a coolant spill on the track, the cleanup from it is horrific. The track hates it, and I promise you, everybody else that's riding there is going to be really disappointed if you spill coolant on the racetrack. The water wetter and other things like the water wetter are water soluble, very, very easy cleanup. So if there is something that happens in terms of the coolant spill, the racetrack can have it cleaned up in mere minutes and everybody's back in action. For any of your track day or motorcycle racing organizations, it's really important to check their rules and regulations. You'll probably find that they're going to ask for some type of coolant replacement. Unless you're in like the novice group of certain track day organizations, they might let you run with the green coolant. What else are we going to do? Well, I decided to remove this coolant overflow bottle that was basically in front of the swing arm, in that cavity up there by the engine. I don't want to deal with that as far back as it was, so I removed it. We're going to install that super cool Motion Pro overflow bottle at the front of the motorcycle, right? Do a little custom install there. So that's another part of this project. And then I thought, while we're at it, God, these things are gorgeous, the Samco hose replacement kits. They look great. That's one reason to replace them. Another reason to replace them is they also have the ability to help the engine to run as much as 9 degrees cooler. We're certainly not guaranteeing that these two things are going to do that for sure, but they do increase the efficiency of the cooling system, and that's cool. When you install these Samco silicone hoses, it's really important you use the right clamp. For every hose kit we also offer a hose clamp kit, and here's the reason why. These silicone hoses can be damaged if you use a standard hose clamp that has the open windows. What will happen is it'll dig into the hose and actually tear the hose up. What you need to use is a hose clamp that is continuous, right? You see it's got a smooth surface inside, even where the adjustment marks are. Really important you use those so you don't damage the hose. What are we going to need to do this? We're going to need a drain pan to drain the coolant. Remember, this stuff is not environmentally friendly. You cannot dump it down the drain. Make sure you capture all of it, make sure you save all of it, and then take it to a recycling center. It's really important that you do that. Do not put this stuff down a storm sewer. With this motorcycle, we're going to drain the coolant. I'm actually going to take a garden hose to it and still capturing it with the drain pan, of course. And I want to flush through it a little bit. I want to make sure I get all the green coolant out of there, start off with a good, clean engine and radiator. And then we're going to install the hose kit, show you how to fill the system, bleed the system, which is really important. You need to get this thing burped so it's purged of air, so it runs as efficient as possible. Our first step is going to be removing the bodywork. That's pretty easy to do with the race bodywork on this bike. Once we have the bodywork removed, we're going to begin draining the coolant. Okay, we're ready to start draining the coolant. I took off the fuel tank, tank cover, seat, upper and lower fairings, and that's going to give us access to the areas we need to get to replace the hoses and then drain and refill the coolant. I've got the radiator cap off. That's on the other side of the motorcycle. On the Honda, we've got a low point drain right here. We'll go ahead and loosen that up. Antifreeze is just so nasty. And drain, like I said, the goal is to really catch all of this recycle center that we're able to take these things to, the oil from the oil changes and the coolant and stuff. And we certainly encourage all of you to do exactly the same. Drains a lot easier, obviously, when you have the radiator cap removed. You get the air from the top, allows it to move down, otherwise you create kind of a vacuum. So it's an important step, removing the radiator cap. Even though you've done this, when you remove the hoses, you're still going to get a little bit of coolant spillage, so you're going to want to keep the drain pan handy, some rags to clean up the floor and such. As you see, I got a little bit on myself here. One thing I want to point out is I started looking at the Samco hose kit, and what they've done here is all the intersections, right, they're built into the hose itself, which is pretty sweet. So we're going to eliminate a lot of these plastic fittings, right, where they're bringing the hoses together, and I think that's probably one of the big performance enhancements is you're going to lose that friction, right? And that's going to create kind of a restriction right there where that plastic goes inside the hose. You lose that with this, so it free flows a lot easier. And that's probably one of the big areas where they pick up that coolant temperature reduction. Tools that you're going to need. Simple hand tools, Phillips screwdriver, right? I like to use a nut driver. You may need a swivel socket, right, to get the hose clamps off. Hose clamp removal tool can also be helpful. We're going to let this drip a little bit more, and then we're going to start pulling the radiator hoses off. Okay, now we're going to start removing the coolant hoses. I'm going to start at the lowest point possible. It's actually even a little bit lower than the drain that we just removed. And most likely we're going to see more coolant spill out when we do that. Pretty self-explanatory. We're going to just loosen up the radiator hose clamp. Rotate this out of the way. And what we have here is super sweet hose removal tool, right? It's got a dulled end, tapered, and what you're able to do is slide it in there, and without damaging the hose, you can get this in there and break the hose loose. Once you've done that, they come off a whole heck of a lot easier, and like I said, definitely going to get a little bit more coolant. Got a lot of hoses to remove on the bike, and quite frankly, I think a lot of that's going to feel like watching paint dry on a wall. I'm going to continue through doing that. We're going to take this bike over after I let everything drip out. We're going to flush the coolant system out using the hose, because I want this super clean. This bike's brand new, never been ridden, and I want to start off without mixing any of the water wear and the coolant, just because it turns into this funky, nasty color, and I don't want to look at it inside this super sweet bike. So when we come back, I'll have this all rinsed out, and we're going to begin installing the new Samco radiator hose kit. Okay, I've got all the hoses in position right now. I've already got the right side, or the brake side of the bike, assembled, and now we're ready to tighten the hose clamps on the clutch side, or the left side. Samco uses the special hose clamps like we showed you. It's very, very important that you buy the hose clamp kit so you do not destroy these hoses. Torque, they have recommended torque settings. I've said it before, I'm not a big torque wrench user. The bottom line with these is you don't need to go crazy on them, okay? What you don't want to do is distort the hose and smash it. You want it to be just tight enough that you get good, comfortable seal. You want to position the hose clamp so that there is a bit of a gap, right, between the end of the hose and the clamp. You don't want it right on the very end. Good even torque. What I like to do too is after I've got them torqued down initially, I'm going to run back over and kind of touch on each one again. Another important thing is you've got the nipple on any one of these fittings, right? You want to make sure that you have the hose clamp off of the nipple. You see the bulge in the hose right there. You never want to position the hose clamp right over that nipple. One of the biggest things that I think this is going to do, that's going to help improve the cooling system, is simply it removed those plastic factory hose junctions. I think it's going to remove some restriction in the cooling system and just allow for much more efficient flow. I took this thing over and completely rinsed it out. I even went as far as to remove the radiator after we had rinsed everything out, of course captured any stray coolant to dispose of properly. Remove the radiator and clean that out until the water is crystal clear out the other side. So we're literally starting with a completely fresh and empty cooling system. Something that's not a bad idea as part of your maintenance too, after you've run the bike for a while, and say you're going to do an oil change service, right? Go ahead and go over the hose clamps again, and just make sure you've got good, even torque. Earlier in the video, we talked about removing that stock coolant reservoir. When we come back, we're going to be set up on the front of the bike, and I'm going to show you how we installed the Motion Pro coolant overflow valve. Part of the fun of assembling a race bike or modifying your bike is solving problems, right? Along the way, let's face it, not all of the stuff we get is going to be just a direct bolt-on super piece of cake. Sometimes you're going to have to get creative and solve some problems to get the end result that you're looking for. With this 2014 Honda CBR1000RR, one of the things I did not want to reuse was the stock coolant reservoir. This was literally in between the swing arm and the engine. I didn't want it there. So to solve that problem, I decided to go with the Motion Pro coolant overflow jug. They have an entire kit. It's going to include hose clamps, a length of hose, a bottle that can handle the heat from the coolant. It actually has a mount kit that you can use and put this right on your fork tube. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to mount this more up front on the motorcycle like we've seen with a lot of the super bikes. So what I did is I fabricated a bracket real quick. This is something you can easily do in your garage. It's just thin gauge aluminum. I pop riveted it right to the actual stock fairing stay. Put a little curve to it. I've already drilled some mounting holes that I'm going to use those cable ties to hold the bottle to, and it fits in nicely. You'll see there's another problem that we had to solve with this bike. The bank angle sensor, or the tip over sensor, it literally mounts to the headlights on the bike. It's not going to work out for a race bike. Okay, so what I did is I quickly fabricated a bracket using that same aluminum, bent it up, drilled a couple of holes. I'm using the lower mounts here from the instrument panel cluster. There's not a lot of weight or stress in this, so I think that's going to work out just fine. I drilled a couple more holes in it, went and got some fasteners, and I've got the bank angle sensor mounted up front using this little aluminum bracket. It was super easy to make. Now for our coolant overflow jug. We're going to go ahead and use a couple of the cable ties that they've supplied to get this mounted in here. The real work was probably finding the right location and making the bracket. That did take just a little bit to do. It wasn't horrible, but it took a few minutes. Now we need to position it so we're able to get the hoses on it. It's going to be just like that. I'm going to bring this cable tie over, thread it through the secondary hole, and get that started like that. To hold this in place, what we'll actually do is we're going to compress the bottle just a little bit. Right, that'll keep it in place. And after looking at it for a few minutes, I also decided that the inlet, which is right here on the bottle, right, is also going to help hold it in place, as this cannot pass by the cable tie. Let's go ahead and snug those up. I said, just collapsing the bottle ever so slightly right there. Now we're going to use the length of the stock hose that routed back through the motorcycle to the factory overflow jug. That fits right over, no problem. And we've got a clamp that was supplied by Motion Pro. If we were able to get this over the top, it looks like it might be a little bit small. So we might have to rethink that, and we're actually going to have to, because that clamp is a little bit to the small side. The reason for that is we're trying to reuse the stock tubing. It's a little thicker than the tubing Motion Pro supplied, so it's going to require a little bit bigger clamp. We'll go ahead and just quickly put in place the actual overflow tube. This needs to route down inside the lower fairing. If in fact the coolant boils over a little bit, it'll just push into the lower fairing and be captured, as we have an AMA legal lower fairing on the bike. So I'm gonna have to get another clamp. I'm sure I've got something in my spare parts bin. We're gonna do that. All right, I went through my spare parts kit. Really didn't have a hose clamp that was gonna work great for this, so we're gonna go with safety wire. Let's go ahead and get this in position. And remember, there is realistically no pressure here, okay? There is only going to be coolant that will exhaust from the radiator, right, once it's expanded into the bottle. Right? And then also, conversely, once the bike's cooled, it can draw it back in. So all we need to do is make sure the hose is not going to fall off. And safety wire is more than adequate for that job. Go ahead and get that right in the center of the nipple they have on that. Twist it like so. That looks pretty good. And then I'm going to take this just one step further. I think this is actually going to do, in the end, a little more than we would get from a clamp. So I'm going to take and wrap that around the top of this nipple like so. And bring it up here. And what this is going to do, this is just really going to kind of hedge our bet. And it's going to make sure that that hose stays up on that nipple, because that's really all that that clamp is supposed to do. Like I said, a lot of times when you're building, especially a race bike like this, a purpose-built bike, a lot of what you're doing is solving problems. And you want to try and think of what can happen when you're out there. And I don't know about you, I really don't want coolant spraying out of the front of the bike. That'll hold that in place. I'm going to trim the two cable ties like so. We'll come back over the other side of the bike. We're going to deal with the routing here of the actual overflow tube itself. You don't have the ram air ducts in place, but I've kind of taken a minute and mocked this up previously, so I have an idea of how I want this to route already. I drilled a couple of holes in this plastic support with the unibit. And use that to anchor the actual overflow hose that will route into our belly pan. Like so. You don't want to go crazy and kink it, you just basically just want to hold it nicely. Bring it down here. Right over the Samco hose, and get a little bigger cable tie here. Kind of try and route it around the back side of it like so. Anchor this in a couple of spots. And then if it does overflow, it will wind up right in the lower fairing, which is, of course, able to catch the fluid, we'll air out of our work table. And one more cable tie down here. Position that just so it'll drip down to the lower, like that. Ideally, you want to kind of get your coolant level so you really don't have a lot of that happening. But that is difficult to do, especially right out of the gate, you know, when you leave the cooling system for the first time. Make sure you don't have it kinked so that fluid can't pass by, but you want it to stay in place. I think we've accomplished that. And trim your cable ties. Okay, now we're ready to start putting the coolant in the motorcycle. Got to go around over to the brake side. That's where the radiator cap is on this bike. This is important. You need to make sure that you have all the air purged from the system. After you went through this process, which is going to be a little bit different on every motorcycle, you're going to want to run the engine, recheck your coolant levels, and then even after the first time you ride it, it's a good idea to recheck the coolant levels and make sure they are where they need to be. Just by dumping the coolant in, a lot of the air will actually force its way up through the top. But it takes more than that to get all the air out of the system. We're going to do two things. First thing is, I'm going to come over here and you can squeeze the hoses a bit, and you'll actually feel it working the coolant through the system. That's one thing you can do. Another thing is we're going to go right back to that low spot here on our system on our Honda, which was that drain bowl. I'm going to let that run a little bit. You'll see how the air is starting to come out. And you can see that's not a good steady stream right away. Go back over, top it off again. We're going to repeat this process a couple of times. Then we will reassemble the bike, get a radiator cap on, run it, warm the engine. You want to get it up to full operating temperature. Then we'll double check our coolant level again before we ride the motorcycle. Okay, we've been filling the system, squeezing the hoses to get the coolant moving through it, right, burping the system. And I want to show you what it looks like down here at this lower drain once we have the air out of the system, the majority of the air that is. You can see that's a good, strong, steady stream. So we're going to go ahead and snug that back up. We're going to put our fuel tank back on. We're going to warm the bike, warm the engine, get it up to operating temperature, right? And then check our coolant level. All right, I've got the system topped off. I purged all the air out. In the end, I used almost 2 complete jugs of the super cool performance coolant. So keep that in mind. If you're doing a project like this on your bike, you're probably going to want to order 2 of those, so you make sure that you have enough. You don't want to end up diluting it further with water. This stuff is pre-diluted, right? It's pre-mixed, it's ready to go, so you don't need to do that anymore. At the end of the day, I decided to leave the cooling fans on this. I think for the type of riding I'm going to be doing with it, that makes the most sense. I'm going to keep an eye on the operating temperature when I'm on the racetrack and see where it's at. By removing the fans, you lose the benefit of cooling the engine down when you're sitting there and you're not in motion. But you also can gain a performance advantage because it will increase the efficiency of the airflow over the radiator. There's some schools of thought that believe that. So on this bike, I might actually try that and see if I'm able to reduce the operating temperature when I'm on the track by removing the fans. Take your time with this. When you bleed the system, you want to make sure that you find a good low spot like that. Helps you purge out the air. Squeeging the hose is going to help a little bit too, get the coolant moving through the system. Get it topped off. You can see I've got just a little bit here in the overflow bottle right now. After I ride this bike, I'm going to check it again after its first full session out on the track, gets up to operating temperature. Right, I'm out there, get a good 8-10 laps on it. We come in and let the motorcycle cool down, and I'm going to for sure check the coolant and make sure we've got it at its proper level. The last thing that I did to it was I safety wired the radiator cap. That's not a bad idea. You don't want that thing popping off on you. Most racing organizations are going to ask that you safety wire the radiator cap, so we went ahead and done that on this motorcycle. We covered a lot of different stuff in this video, right? We covered the Samco hoses. We covered the proper procedure for purging the air and changing the coolant on your motorcycle, right? And we also covered the installation of the Motion Pro Overflow bottle. Hopefully, this video helps you service your motorcycle. Remember, if you're not comfortable doing it, this does not take the place of a licensed motorcycle mechanic. If you're not comfortable doing it, especially after you watch this video, take the bike in and have a professional do it. I'm Brian Van, and this is our 2014 STG Road Racing World Honda CBR1000RR.